It is often called a museum of ethnology, since the region is home to a vast variety of peoples, with dozens of different languages, cultures, and customs. That has historically created tensions, and those tensions came to a head in the Great War in Transcaucasia. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to a Great War special about Transcaucasia and the First World War. This is the region south of the Great Caucasus chain of mountains that was boxed in 100 years ago by the Black Sea to the west, the Caspian Sea to the east, Russia to the north, and to the south by the Ottoman Empire and Persia. Its history was seen by many as a history of a troublesome region, a place of endless conflict between mountain tribes, bound by their own militant political or religious organizations, but influenced by the Ottomans and the Russians, who had fought a century-long series of wars over the territories on the Black Sea. There were three groups, though, that were large enough to really matter in the context of the great empires: the Georgians, the Azerbaijanis, and the Armenians. By the end of the 19th century, cities like Baku became economic hotspots from oil and mineral deposits, and Tiflis a hub city for the Transcaucasian Railway. Increasing economic value sparked a new wave of Russian imperialism and colonialism. Georgia, with a strong presence of Russian authority, adopted Russian and European culture most quickly, which led to a secularization of the country, as many Islamic traditions were abandoned. But Georgia still remained a mostly feudal society with an ambiguous political loyalty, and much of the Georgian aristocracy dreamed of an independent Georgia and a return of their former status. In Azerbaijan, where over 80% of a population of 1.8 million were peasants, the mullahs propagated nationalistic and pan-Islamic ideology, wanting independence and unity for all Muslims. Azeri society was feudal in nature, centered on khans and landowners who rejected much of Russian authority, like mandatory military service. Much of that was religiously based, and many Azeri aristocrats did still serve in the Russian army, even up to the rank of general, though they were not conscripted. But most of the common people of the Caucasus, the peasants and the land and factory workers who were legally still partly serfs, shared a social democratic or socialistic belief. They had strong ties to the Russian Social Democrat Workers' Party, and in the wake of the 1905 revolt, many became more and more radicalized in their demands for freedom of speech and of the press. Count Vorontsov-Dashkov became viceroy of the Caucasus. Now, Russia's goal had always been to take the Straits of Constantinople, and a future conflict with the Ottoman Empire seemed inevitable. Vorontsov-Dashkov believed that the Christian Armenians under Ottoman rule could be pushed towards rebellion. The Ottomans saw the dissatisfied peoples of the Caucasus as potential allies in such a confrontation. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908 and the restoration of constitutional rule stirred excitement not just in Ottoman lands, but in Russia as well. Far from seeing it as an expression of ethnic or religious particularism, many contemporaries saw the revolution as part of a universal march towards representative government and freedom. The relatively free atmosphere of Constantinople attracted a large socialist community of former Russian subjects, like the Georgian separatists, most notably Archimandrite Nicholas, former head of the largest monastery in Georgia. He predicted that an Ottoman offensive towards Georgia would spark an anti-Russia rebellion. As the summer of 1914 approached, the questions abounded. In case of war, who would follow the call to arms? Who would resist for their own cause? And who would simply defect to the other side? Enver Pasha, Ottoman Minister of War, engaged in talks with Russia about the possibility of an Ottoman-Russian alliance, or at least some sort of non-aggression agreement. These came to nothing, and many Russian ministers favored war with the Ottomans to solve the regional question once and for all. So Enver Pasha turned to Germany, who promised to guarantee the integrity of the Ottoman Empire and secure the Muslim elements in Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Sazonov thought that in case of a Russian invasion into Anatolia, he would have the support of the Kurds, Armenians, and Assyrians. In August 1914, although Russia and the Ottomans were technically still at peace, a proxy war was already beginning. a delegation of Ottoman Assyrians asked the Russian government for 35,000 rifles, promising that they were prepared to rise up in case of war. Armenians formed armed gangs like the Druzhini, and many families left their homes, joining the refugees who wanted to escape all chaos or conscription once the Russian mobilization put new strain on the region. Prices skyrocketed, there were food shortages, and property was confiscated for the war effort. Possibility of war between the two empires destabilized the whole region. State authority in many places broke down, and century-old political and religious antagonisms bred hostility and violence. Armed groups harassed each other, burned down religious buildings, and ransacked houses. Irregular forces attacked the police, and army units responded with extreme measures. By October, the border region was in a virtual state of war. Russian Cossacks were sent out to kill Muslims in Georgia and burn down mosques. Christian Armenian militants attacked Ottoman civilians. This sparked reactions like the punitive expedition into the Choroky Valley. Fears of pan-Turkist sympathizers inside the Russian-controlled territory led to the deportation of over 10,000 Muslims from the border regions. Both sides practiced violence, reinforced by differences in belief and identity, and encouraged by material incentive or political power. Troops and tribes were armed, and the propaganda machines were in full motion. The Ottomans began financing pan-Islamic activism to rally the Muslim parts of the Caucasus. In Trabzon, the Teşkilat-i Mahsusa, the special organization founded by Enver Pasha, carried out clandestine and guerrilla operations inside North Caucasus, Azerbaijan, and Persia. Armed with pamphlets, small arms, and explosives, they called upon the Brothers of the Faith to join the uprising. There had been already irregular combat operations by British and Russian forces on the Persian border and in the Levant against the Ottomans before the countries were officially at war. Russian forces occupied Koprukoy and threatened Erzurum, prompting an Ottoman counterattack. Supported by over 5,000 Laz and Ajar irregulars, the Ottomans took the towns of Artvin and Ardanush, and after Ottoman warships shelled Odessa, Sevastopol, and Novorossiysk, Tsar Nicholas II officially declared war on October 31st, 1914. Most of the German and Ottoman High Command wanted the Ottoman Third Army to be passive, to tie down Russian forces and have irregulars stir up the Russian rear. Only in the case of a major victory on the Eastern Front should that army advance. Some, though, dreamed of amphibious operations at Odessa and southern Ukraine to incite not only the Muslims in Georgia, but also the Jews and Cossacks to rebel against the Russians. Those ambitions were pretty unrealistic, but Enver Pasha wanted a decisive victory in the Caucasus, and he wanted his own Tannenberg, so he launched his winter offensive. The Greeks, Armenians, and Russian colonists mostly fled to the north, but the Muslims stayed on, feeling that no harm would come to them from their co-religionists. When the Turks retired, the Greeks and Armenians came back and found their Muslim neighbors still there, but there was no longer the old relationship. The proximity of war and the march of armies had roused that herald of ill will, the spirit of nationalism. The Armenians and Greeks began to accuse their Muslim neighbors of having assisted the Turks in their invasion and betrayed their suzerain, the Tsar. Armed agents of the Armenian national societies in Tiflis began to appear in some villages. Hooligans from the bazaar towns began to prowl. The Russian authorities paid no attention, and the rural police closed their eyes. Then Christian bands began to be formed and to march into Muslim villages. There would be some pillaging, a few shots would be fired, and then would begin a general massacre. A large part of the Kars province was laid waste. Cattle fled to the mountains and died of want and cold, and the Mohammedan population was reduced by some 30% through hunger and disease during the following months. This, then, was the net result of Enver Pasha's attempt to deliver his fellow Muslims in the Caucasus from Russian rule. The Battle of Sarıkamış ended with a rout from which the Ottoman army never really recovered, and eventually Russia advanced on Erzurum and Trabzon in 1916. The end of Russia's Brusilov offensive that summer left the Russian army exhausted, though, and unable to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, so the Caucasus front fell silent. Thing is, neither the Ottomans nor the Russians had any concrete plans for the region. Russian Minister of Agriculture Krivoshein wanted to colonize eastern Anatolia with Cossacks or Russians, sure, but most other ministers saw the region now as more of a burden than a blessing. No side was really interested in an independent Armenia, nor in annexing the troublesome inhabitants of the region. Then the revolution reached Transcaucasia in March 1917. Imperial rule crumbled, and the prospect of democracy was on everyone's lips, and a shared hope of brotherhood among the working class of the various peoples of the region rose. Whereas before, Muslims that served within the Russian army were often treated as second class and had to prove loyalty through bravery in the form of medals. Now, Muslim and non-Muslim Russians were equal. The provisional government in Petrograd established the Special Transcaucasus Committee, known as the Ozakom, from members of the Duma. But the Ozakom was weak, and the government attention was far from the Caucasus. Other committees sprang up and challenged authority. Police chiefs were arrested. Armed groups roamed the streets. Meetings and demonstrations were held by parties and committees like the Tiflis Soviet, the Baku Soviet, the All-Caucasian Muslim Congress, the Georgian clergy, and the Soviet workers' deputies. They all represented different classes, and the Ozakom was too weak to challenge them. The Mensheviks would emerge as the strongest faction, but although the Bolsheviks were weaker, they were extremely active, and lines were drawn in the sand as the November Revolution hit. The connection with Russia had been broken, and Transcaucasia has been left alone. We have to stand on our own feet and either help ourselves or perish through anarchy. And this is where I'll end for the day. The Peace of Brest-Litovsk that marked Russia's exit from the war also marked an ending of the old and the beginning of a new era for the Transcaucasus. It would be an era of instability and strife, of the 26 Baku Commissars, of the Democratic Republic of Georgia, of the German occupation, and of the Central Caspian dictatorship and the Dunster Force, all of which we'll talk about in future. Today was just a brief look at a very complicated region of proud and distinct peoples who were led into conflict and often into death by the circumstances of the Great War. We'd like to thank Nijat Azimzadeh for helping us steer through this complex and fascinating region. If you want to learn more about another fascinating tale in Central Asia, you can check out our episode about the Mad Baron right here. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram for more and more info on the First World War, and do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.